Jason Roth, Keystone Agronomist. Want to talk fungicides and application timing. Let's start with corn. If we think historically, what we saw in corn was a fairly linear response to fungicide applications. What do I mean by that? I mean that incrementally we saw yield gain the later we went with the fungicide application. Early vegetation versus mid vegetation versus that tassel time frame. Hey, the tassel time frame paid the most in terms of bushels protected, right? And that's not surprising because as a host, the plant in the reproductive stages is just much more suitable for diseases than it is early in the season. And so that's why the fungicide was more valuable. And so that classic VT tassel time frame became a really main timing for us with applications for diseases like gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight. It was really effective. However, there's a newer kid on the block, and that is tar spot. And tar spot's a little bit different, right? Because it is really aggressive, and it also can really build up and ramp up later into this season. And so the problem or the risk is with a classic tassel application timing, maybe we get 21 days, about 3 weeks of control out of a fungicide. That leaves us exposed a lot on the back end, generally about 30 more days of grain fill occurring. And that's really risky with disease like tar spot, and can lead us a little bit more susceptible to yield loss. And the other thing, of course, that's changing is genetics themselves. Genetics today are built for a lot of back end of the season yield development through increased kernel weight. And so we put both of those together, and there can be risk of just sticking to the classic VT timing. And there's some data out there with tar spot that has actually shown that the R2 brown silk, R3 milk stage timings can be the most profitable timings with the highest return on investment from a fungicide application. Now, does that mean you should do the R2, R3 timing? Well, not necessarily either. It depends on the year, right? There can be risk in a certain year of going too early and running out of protection on the backside. And there's also could be in certain years, if there's more disease pressure, going too late and getting hurt with disease on the front end of the season. So every year, we really have to be engaged at monitoring the crops and the disease pressure. The story is there. It's just not as simple as it used to be, and we need to be students at the game and managing that crop throughout the whole season. Now, if you jump to soybeans for a minute, we think about the classic time frame in soybeans has probably been about R3 if we're going to apply a fungicide. That would be the early pod stage fill, and it's generally been pretty successful. Well, we are often putting in a micronutrient and an insecticide with it, and maybe a little bit of a downside is, hey, we don't get as much value probably out of the insecticide that early, because in most years our insect pressure is still pretty low at the R3 early pod stage. It's not until later that insect pressure really builds, and again, insecticides only lasting about 7 days, we just don't get that much activity out of them. So it's that can be kind of a risk or a downside. And then the other downside might be if we're just really sticking to that late flower, early pod stage, that'd be late R2, early R3 time frame, is, man, that still leaves us a lot of risk on the backside for development in soybeans, because soybeans also have been built to really develop yield late in the season through seed weight, and that early pod stage still leaves us a lot of time. So it's not a bad option, but there could be some risk in certain years and maybe some benefit if the crop is fairly clean to pushing that time frame back a little bit, maybe more into the R4 full pod stage, because that gives us a little bit more protection from the fungicide on the back end and may increase the value of the insecticide a little bit. And then in fact, we have some people who maybe are doing a split fungicide pass. They're going to go early with something more value oriented just to kind of keep the crop clean, and allow them to really come in with a more premium fungicide product later into the season, say that R4, mid R4, full pod, even in the R5, getting into the early seed stage with a premium fungicide and insecticide to really try to get more value out of that insecticide later in the season. So those are just some things to think about as it comes to application timing in soybeans, maybe some different things you want to consider. So I'll link a few things to this video on those subjects, and thanks for tuning in.